Only 14% of adults say they are very happy, and for the longest time, I considered myself a part of that 86th percentile, anything but very happy. For a long time, I was doing everything I thought would make me content and propel me into that top 14%. I tried advancing my career, finding a new and better apartment, even taking a completely luxurious vacation, like you see on White Lotus. But truth be told, none of those things, or even all of them combined, made me any happier. If anything, they made me even more miserable. One concept which I came across is called the happiness paradox, or the idea that constantly seeking and pursuing happiness actually makes you feel less happy. To get out of this happiness trap, I read The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. This self-help guide that shows you how to actually be happy without chasing happiness. To begin my authentic journey to happiness, I needed a tool that people trust and depend on, and one that has proven results. Here are few tips. The Happiness Trap taught me about actually being happy. 1. Focus on your observing self. Harris makes an incredible distinction about the self, the thinking self, and the observing self. The thinking self is the part of us that is always making judgments. It's that little voice in all of our heads that we can't seem to quiet. However, the observing self is more important. It simply observes. Instead of thinking about and judging an experience, you can actually engage in the experience without any analysis. Rethink negative thoughts. If you're anything like me, negative thoughts rule your life. But according to Russ Harris, negative thoughts can be managed not by avoiding them, but by simply viewing them as thoughts. Nothing more. They're just words and symbols that keep swirling around in your mind, and they have no real impact on your waking life. Let your uncomfortable feelings roam. The more we try to avoid the fundamental truth that all human life involves pain, the more likely we are to struggle with that pain when it arises, thus creating more suffering. No matter how hard anyone tries, avoiding difficult feelings is impossible. So instead of trying to avoid them and push them out of your mind, Russ Harris actually recommends allowing yourself to expand so much that you give those feelings room to breathe. Counterintuitive, right? By giving negative thoughts the freedom to roam, they have less control over you. They're simply passing feelings that will come and go. Be present. The thing about chasing happiness is that when we're constantly on a mission to find joy, we miss out on what's right in front of us. Here comes that buzzword we all know and love, mindfulness. If you've ever read The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, you'll already be familiar with this type of practice. But essentially, both happiness gurus recommend immersing yourself in the here and now, increasing your awareness of the present moment, which allows you to move towards a more fulfilling life. Identify your values and act on them. To live a fulfilling, happy life, you have to determine what you value most or what you stand for. Like in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, readers are encouraged to focus on what gives them a sense of purpose and really pinpoint what they truly want in life. Once you identify your values, write them down with short-term and long-term goals to work towards so you can embody them every single day. Listen to this carefully. Once, in a quaint village nestled between rolling hills, there lived a young man named Zane. Zane was a dreamer, and ever since he was a boy, he'd been captivated by the legend of the Great Mountain. It was said that at the very top of this mountain, a treasure awaited anyone brave enough to reach it, a treasure so magnificent, it would bring eternal happiness and contentment. From the moment Zane heard this, he dedicated himself to reaching the mountain's peak. He spent years preparing. He honed his body through rigorous training, studied maps, and asked every elder in the village for advice. Finally, the day arrived when he felt ready to begin his great journey. With nothing but a satchel of food, a sturdy walking stick, and his heart full of hope, Zane set out. The first days of his journey were exhilarating. He walked through lush forests, breathing in the scent of pine, hearing the sweet symphony of birdsong. Occasionally, he would come across other travelers, an old merchant, a band of wandering minstrels, a shepherd with his flock. They'd offer him food and conversation, but Zane, focused on his goal, would politely decline most invitations to linger. "I'm on my way to the great mountain," he'd say. "I must keep going." Weeks turned into months. Zane found himself climbing steeper paths and crossing cold streams. The further he went, the more difficult the journey became. There were times when he doubted himself, when storms battered him, when loneliness weighed on his spirit. But he pressed on, always keeping his eyes on the distant mountain. One evening, after weeks of grueling travel, Zane came across a small village at the foot of the mountain. He decided to rest for a while, gather his strength, and prepare for the final leg of his journey. In the village, he met an old man named Elias. Elias had lived in the village his entire life, watching countless travelers set off toward the mountain, none of whom had ever returned. He was kind and wise, and Zane felt drawn to him. "You've come far," Elias said one evening as they sat by a crackling fire. "But tell me, young man, what are you seeking at the top of the great mountain?" "Happiness," Zane replied without hesitation. "It's said there's a treasure there, one that will grant me eternal happiness." Elias smiled gently and leaned forward. "And have you not found happiness along the way?" Zane blinked, unsure of how to answer. He thought of the countless beautiful moments he had encountered on his journey. The laughter of the minstrels, the kindness of the shepherd, the serenity of the forest. But all those moments seemed fleeting compared to the treasure he sought. "I suppose I've had moments of joy," Zane admitted, "but they're nothing compared to what I will find at the top." Elias shook his head slowly. "Happiness is not something waiting at the end of a journey. It's not hidden on top of a mountain, nor in a treasure chest. Happiness is what you make of each moment. You've already had it, many times over." Zane pondered this for several days, but eventually his desire to reach the summit overpowered his doubt. He thanked Elias for his hospitality and set off again, more determined than ever. The climb was brutal. Zane faced freezing winds, treacherous cliffs, and aching exhaustion. But finally, after many days, he reached the summit. His heart pounded with anticipation as he scanned the horizon, searching for the treasure he'd dreamed of for so long. But there was nothing. No chest, no sparkling jewels, no sign of the eternal happiness he had sought, just the vast expanse of the sky and the world below. Zane felt a wave of disappointment so heavy he almost collapsed. He had sacrificed years of his life for this. His feet ached, his body was weathered, and his heart felt empty. And then, as he stood there, a sudden thought occurred to him. The wind brushing his face felt cool and refreshing. The sky, a brilliant blue, stretched endlessly before him. He could see forests, rivers, and villages far below. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything he had ever imagined. For the first time in months, Zane sat down and truly allowed himself to feel the moment. The beauty of the world, the stillness of the mountain, the peace within himself. It wasn't the treasure he had expected, but in that moment, Zane realized that Elias had been right. Happiness wasn't waiting for him on top of the mountain. It had been with him all along, in the laughter of strangers, in the beauty of the trees, in the sound of rivers flowing, and even in the challenges he had faced. The journey itself had been the treasure. Zane descended the mountain, lighter than ever, not because he had found the treasure he had sought, but because he had learned that true happiness comes from being fully present in each step of the journey. From that day forward, Zane no longer sought after distant goals, always thinking happiness lay somewhere else. Instead, he lived each day with gratitude, finding joy in the present moment, and sharing his wisdom with others who sought the great mountain. For he knew that the secret to happiness was not in the treasure at the end, but in the journey itself.